So first of all, I want to thank all of you for being here this morning and this afternoon, as we pay our final respect to Alvin Samuels. Before we begin our service, just a reminder, if you've not already done so, we ask you to please take a moment to either silence or, better yet, turn off your cell phones, just so we can avoid any unwanted interruption. And I really thank you in advance. I know that we very much depend on our cell phones, but we really want to ensure that we have, the maximal dignity and no interruptions or distractions. So thank you for that. I want to begin today with two of the most traditional psalms of all the 150 that we have in Scripture. Some only 2 or 3 verses, some more than 100 verses, some upbeat, some rather melancholy. But the two I recite in Alvin's memory today reflect, and I always say this, 2 themes that, first of all, we have certain limited and finite existence. And the psalmist reminds us that as we get older, many of you could tell this a lot better than I can, but as we get older, our years do seem to go by very quickly. Right? Each year seems to somehow get away from us, especially as we have each year 1 fewer year remaining. But we also have unique ability to leave behind a legacy. And of course, we'll talk a little bit about Alvin's legacy, which is very considerable. And so I'm going to start with Psalm number 15, and then, of course, work my way over to the 23rd Psalm. Mizmor David. Adonai mi yagur ba'ohalecha, mi yishkon behar kodshecha, olech tamim ufoel tzedek v'dover emet bilvavo, lo ragal lishono, lo asar re'ehu ra'a v'cherpa lo nasal krovo, nivzeh be'einav nimas, bet yirei Adonai yechabed nishba la'ara v'lo yamir, kaspo lo natan b'neshech v'shocharo nakilo lakach lo ose'ele, lo yimod le'olam. Lord, who will dwell in your sanctuary and who abide on your holy mountain? The person who lives with integrity and does what is right, the person who speaks the truth in his heart, the person who has no slander upon his tongue, the person who does no evil to others, the person who honors those who revere the Lord, the person who never retracts a promise once made, nor accepts a bribe against the innocent. Whoever does all of these will stand firm eternally. And then the second is probably the most famous chapter of any in the entire Scripture, not just the book of Psalms, the famous 23rd Psalm. And this is, of course, one of the most important readings of any service of a funeral or of an interment. Mizmor David. Adonai ro'i l'chsar, bino deshe yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yanaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni b'maglei tzedek leman shemo, gam ki elech b'geit salmavet, lo yirara ki ata imadi, shivtecha umishantecha hema yanachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged sorarai, Dishanta v'shemen roshi kosi revaya, achto v'chesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'veit Adonai la'orech yamim. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me upon straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you're with me. Your rod and staff comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil, and my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will abide in the house of the Lord forever. So really the central portion of our service here in the chapel today will be that we have a number of people who will be offering words of remembrance, what we call in English eulogy, called in English spade. And of course, you can't compress 88 years of life with all of its richness and nuance into a few moments, but we are bidden to take some time to remember the importance of those who've gone before us and who've enriched our lives in so many ways, and reflect upon the ways in which our own paths have been illuminated by those who've come before us. And I want to actually start. This came straight from Jerusalem, thanks to the wonders of email, to my box from Rabbi Eric Citron. Rabbi Eric Citron was rabbi of what was then called Tikvat Shalom from 1981 to 1991. I arrived in 91. Yes, the two of us know each other. And in fact, his daughter, many of you know his daughter, Sarah, was my student when I taught joint program at JTS many years ago. And he asked me to share these reflections on Alvin, and I hope you will find much comfort and consolation in these words from Rabbi Citron. They're really honest, okay, I'm just saying. First, Alvin and I got off on the literal wrong foot. At my interview weekend, that would be in about 1980 or so, Alvin asked me in his best Paragould, Arkansas accent and his booming voice, how did I think that I was going to manage to fill the shoes of Rabbi Victor Hoffman? Victor Hoffman was the rabbi here from 1971 to 1981. After all that Rabbi Victor Hoffman had done was to help us move to Metairie from New Orleans and grow it from 100 families to 300 families in 12 years. And how in the world was I going to match that? I was slightly flummoxed, as you may imagine. And here is Rabbi Citron's response. Very good response, by the way. I'm not trying to fit in anyone else's shoes. I have my own. I look forward to working with the leadership and laity congregation to continue to learn, grow, and become an even better Kehillah Kedosha. Alvin apologized for putting me in that spot, and he told me, great answer. It was a great answer, too. Alvin was intellectually very inquisitive about the evolution of Jewish thought, philosophy, theology, and politics over the centuries. I believe sometime after I left, he concluded a Master in Judaic Studies from Spartus. He was not only a chemical engineer and student of physics, he asked questions, and he made statements that were based in the clear sense of right and wrong, good and evil. And he was a very, very proud Jewish man living in a place that could be harsh for Jews and a profession that could be harsh for Jews as well. But he never hid who he was, and his Jewish consciousness was a strengthening element for others as well. Alvin was a regular on Shabbat mornings and participated in the Torah discussions that characterized Tikvat Shalom Shabbat morning services. His unique approach to reading text literally and relating the Torah portion of Haftarah to current events was legend. That's a very rabbinic enterprise, by the way. He was an iconoclast, and he said things that would inspire discussion at our Kiddush luncheon. He and a few others would sit together and discuss, why do we have a different interpretation of sin and punishment after the Shoah? Why doesn't God do Sodom and Gomorrah or split the sea anymore? He came to adult ed classes. I taught about Heschel. He appreciated Heschel's interfaith work. He was the first Jewish person I ever heard say that we Jews owe a great debt to Christianity for spreading the basic message of monotheism to billions of people. He told me he was very proud of me when I became the first Jew on the Second Harvesters Food Bank Board, then owned and operated by the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And when I co-chaired and chaired Jewish Family Service Passover Food Drive, which provided food for indigent families for Passover and poor Christian families for Easter, he and Madeline donated generously and helped to deliver some of the boxes of food. Alvin was most proud of his wife and his children's accomplishments when Madeline became Tikvat Shalom first woman president. He was so proud, and when his boy succeeded in life, he was more proud. The last thing I would mention was Alvin's commitment to the entire, that's all caps, I don't know how to say that to you, but it's all caps, Jewish community of New Orleans. The example I would share was his commitment to trying to maintain the Lakeshore Hebrew Day School. He came up with creative ideas. Ultimately, it did not survive, but later we have a different day school. He was incredibly generous with his time and substance, proved himself a true mensch in conservative Jew. When he came to me distressed, his efforts were not going to succeed. I reminded him I was taught at the seminary the needs of the community, Klal Yisrael, are critical for the success of any single congregation. A strong community means diverse congregations can flourish. Alvin always wanted there to be a strong New Orleans Jewish community. I hope I gave him some chizuk at that time. May Alvin's memory be a blessing, and may he rest in peace. And condolences to Madeline, Mark and Kara, Greg, Melanie, Jennifer, to Alvin and Madeline's grandchildren, Jeffrey, Nana, Eric and Ingrid, Naomi, Bram, Jacob, Olivia and Connor, and to their great granddaughter, Marin. Hugs from the Citrons of Jerusalem and Chicago. I'll be happy if you have words of reaction. I'm happy to send them to Rabbi Citron. We communicate on email with some regularity, so happy to send them. The next person I call upon, I don't know if the word friendship is enough. I just don't have a stronger one. But I know Hugo, as I told you, you and Alvin were chaverim in both sense of the word, both people who had an extraordinary friendship going back almost 70 years. And also, chaver is a colleague, people who unite for a common purpose. And in many ways, you enjoyed that relationship with Alvin in both ways. So, Hugo, we're ready for you.
I don't have any comments left. Rabbi Citron, if you're listening, I just gave Elliot a recap of the minutes of the meeting selecting a new rabbi, and it was Rabbi Citron. And now that you said everything I was going to say, I'm sorry we decided to hire you. So I hope you're listening, but so many things go through my mind. One thing, just observing the people that came through, nobody was crying. Everybody was laughing. And those are the sweet memories. There'll be time for crying much later on. And then I thought, what am I going to say? I went up to my library and I found The Critical Path. So I started writing what is in the obituary. And then I saw the obituary and I said, I can't do that. I got to come up with something else. And then this morning, probably all through the night, the word friendship came up and we discussed the meaning of that. And then I said, friendship. So what ship are we on? You know, so many rabbis say life is a journey, death is a destination. We're on this ship and we ain't getting off. We're going to stay and we're going to stay and we're going to stay. The journey's going to keep going on. So then I figured out what are we going to say, and I wrote it out in this paper, which is about 50 years old. And Lee said, don't do that, just put some bullet points out. So hopefully I'll be able to not mess up. But first of all, I should have started beginning. Thank you for allowing me a few words. Friendship, we already talked about that. Do I begin at the beginning or do I begin at the end? Do I begin at Bereshit or end in Deuteronomy? And I decided to take both ends. So I'll begin at the beginning in Bereshit. 1954, none of you guys remember that. I went to Champaign, Urbana for a master's degree in graduate school. I was a member of Phi Epsilon Pi fraternity in the University of Omaha. UNO, I tell people, but they think it's here, but it's the University of Nebraska in Omaha. Anyway, and there was a Phi Ep chapter not far from the apartment that I had rented. So I go in there and I meet some of the people and I meet Al. And I think he was what they called a bursar. He was in charge of getting the food and arranging everything. And we talked, and so that was the beginning of a handshake, a Phi Ep handshake. Any Phi Eps in the room? Nobody's going to learn that handshake because it's stuck with Al and me. Okay, and Chaim, our first names or our names didn't come up during that discussion. And then it just occurred to me yesterday, and Al and I have not discussed that, but there was a fraternity, a Jewish fraternity across the street from the Phi Ep house, Sigma Phi, or I forget the name of it. But Madeline, there were some attractive girls there. So I'm not going into that. All right, so here we go, Phi Ep, bursar, meals. I took my meals there, and I even remember a room in the Phi Ep house where I was writing my dissertation, and I would go through reams of paper like this. And so that was it. I really don't remember much more, and I wish I would have asked Al, do you remember any more of that meeting? Anyway, so we did the handshake, and that's what I remember. So now you would jump forward to 1967, 13 years later. Lo and behold, we end up here, and Al and Madeline end up here. How could that happen? I don't even know, Madeline, how we first met again and remembered that original, because I don't think we were in contact for those 13 years. Anyway, so we came here with a family with 3 daughters. You came with 2 sons, soon to have a 3rd. And can you imagine 3 sons and 3 daughters, and we could never make a deal? How did that happen? I mean, I'm thinking, okay, but we tried. Okay. And I think about, I don't know how many of you have made those travels, but that family traveled because of Al's career. And my family traveled because of my career. And those sacrifices that those families made, how often does that happen? And think about it. And I thought about it. And the support that the spouse gives to the other spouse to further their career. What else have I got? So there it started. CCNO, Conservative Congregations of New Orleans, Tikvat Shalom, Shir Chadash, Community Day School, Jewish Community Day School. my best friend, my chavar, we started talking 54 to 67 to 22. Okay. Now I'm going backwards. Although there were lunch and dinners that we discussed, and the call from Madeline lately was, I'm going to play Mahjong, you available? Yep, I'll be there. And either it was Betsy's on Canal Street or that coffee shop. And it was great because Al would eat some bacon or whatever, and I'd look at him and he'd laugh, and we'd discuss that back and forth, or what, not bacon, but sausage or something. No. Anyway, so then but Madeline already had arranged with the person knowing what my menu was, and then I'd go to pay and you'd already paid the bill. So you don't remember that, I do. The kosher food, the structure, and yeah, you read about the structure in that obituary and the academy. And I think that structure and that discipline was probably a little tough on the family. And I guess it was tough love, is that what they call it? And because Al and I discussed that, and I knew there was some tough love going on there. So after discussions, we'd argue back and forth. And the rabbi referred to that about truth, what is the meaning of a God, etc. And we go back and forth. I said, you're nuts. And he'd say, I'm not nuts, you're crazy. And with that kashrut stuff and so on, and back and forth and back and forth. How can you have such a great friendship like that? You know, you can choose your friends, you can't choose your relatives. So that was a great friendship. How can that be replaced where you can insult one another and fight it out, but not physically, but mentally, and enrich each other's lives? And that's what it did for me. And I'm sure it did for Al. We discuss about God. And I'd say, how do we know? And that word that kept coming up, The Critical Path by Chaim Wolf, and then the other book, what's it in here? I got it. Truth by Chaim Wolf. We kept discussing what truth is and what is it. And he believed it so much in God. And here we are at services wherever we are, and we say it, but do we really believe it? What do we say after the Shema? Adonai Elohim Emet. Adonai God, you are truth. We say it. Do we know what we're saying? Al did. He meant it. He knew there was a God, and they had a relationship. When we say the Chadash, Yitgadal b'Yitgadash, all of us are saying it. Do we know what we're saying? May God's name be exalted. Okay. Now going back, I miss him. I miss the handshake. And go back to last Thursday. We're at the hospital. Lise leans over and says, Al, your friend is here. Chaim 1 wants to say to Chaim 2, where are you? Come on, give him a handshake. Wasn't there. Go back about, huh? So there was a flicker. That was Thursday. Was it 2 weeks before when the news came out about fusion? I go over to the place where he was staying with other patients. Yeah, Greg already called me and sent me the message. I said, Al, fusion, it's coming. This is what you've been working on. He says, yeah, wait a minute, folks. We were in this master room. I have a message for you. Fusion is here. It's going to change the world. This was, 10 days ago? And they acknowledged him. I said, Al, sit down. Let's go over to the table where we're going to eat now. There were about 8. And I said, I'll push you into it. No, I'm not pushing anywhere. I can move with my legs in the wheelchair. I'm going over there. So we get there and having vegetable beef soup with a grilled cheese sandwich or something. Wait a minute. I was the first colonel in my military academy. And it was that loud. That loud. And then we quieted down. We talked some more. We visited several times. We get the secret handshake, and that was it. So in Chaim Wolf, this book, I went up to get it, and believe it or not, I found it right away. It's the story that's in the obituary, but there's another one. There's an acknowledgement in here. To my wife, Madeline, my greatest love and respect for putting up with my unceasing search for truth, which validates my love for you. Okay. Tears can come later, but smiles are going on now. And then, in perfect handwriting, which I find hard to read, Chaim, my oldest and dearest friend, my brother, what an inspiration you are. I only wish I could be more like you. Till 120, Chaim 2. And then there's one more. I called Brother Joe on Thursday and told him, and I don't even remember this. Thank God I have a twin brother because he remembers more than I do. He said, yeah, don't you remember when Al came? I said, Al came to Omaha, Nebraska? He said, yeah, Dad was dying and Al wanted to come on. And what happened? He said, we went into the nursing home, which, by the way, won the national award for the best nursing home in the United States, the Rose Blumkin Jewish home. Anyway, he said he and Dad were talking. And what did he say? And Al said to him, when you get up there, will you say hello to my dad? And Joe said, our dad said, yeah. So, Al, when you get up there, say hello to your dad, to my dad, to Will, and to Patty. See you later.
Thank you, Hugo. Yeah, right. Wow. Okay. Okay. So we have several more speakers. I'm going to start with the grandchildren, then do the children. Eric, you want to be first? Okay.
Thank you, Uncle Hugo. I'm Eric, Nepal's grandson. Love y'all. Just good to see all of y'all. A lot of good memories here. Nampa approached every relationship with a goal: to save the world. He invested heavily into education because he foresaw a global existential crisis that could only be solved by educated Jewish leaders. He challenged young people to listen deeply to questions others would never think to ask. While often rhetorical, he expected answers with depth. Long walks along the levees after Shabbat dinner became routine when I was as young as 5 or 6. Always the same Socratic style conversation. Him asking questions, me invariably answering wrong, him correcting, rinse, repeat. Every kid wants their voice to be heard, and Nampa loved hearing it. In the middle parts of my childhood, Nampa was the biggest figure in my life. Part dad, part teacher, and part friend. He was the patriarch, and he led our family. As a family, we had hard times. What was special about Nampa is that everything was an opportunity to strengthen the family and bring us closer. As a kid, to watch an adult navigate those hard times and stay positive, to resist bitterness and despair, was hugely impactful. So much of my decision-making is a result of his strength and character. After Katrina, we moved to Austin as a family. Namo and Nampa bought a house for all of us to live in. They put my brother, sister, and I in school. As crazy as it sounds, Katrina has never been a painful memory for me. I loved living with Namo and Nampa. Nampa was so calm about the entire year that it barely registered that anything was wrong. His solution to that problem was so complete that as a kid, I felt completely safe and taken care of. During that year, Nampa became really invested in me and in the friends I was making. I remember having friends from school over at the house, and they loved talking to Nampa. Afterwards at school, they would go over the conversations with me, trying to figure out the hidden meanings in some of the more esoteric comments of his. That's around the time I realized how special our relationship was and how lucky I was to have him present in my life. The long walks along the levees became long conversations at the breakfast table. Even after altering my responses to account for past corrections, I would get frustrated that I was still giving answers that weren't quite right, that still required correction. I realized later in life that for Nampa, the right answer could only ever be lived, not told. Someone who is committed to the mission of living up to their potential and using their gifts and talents to better the world and protect their family. That was his right answer. Nampa died in peace, passed in the night, sleeping. He also died in peace psychologically and spiritually because he deeply believed that every one of his descendants were living the right answer.
Okay, thank you. I guess that leaves Jeffrey next.
Those were beautiful words, Eric. Fewer people have had as big of an impact on my life as my grandfather. He was different things to different people, but to me, he was my hero. We spent a lot of time together when I was growing up. And then later on in life, when I moved away, one of my favorite things that he would say when I would call him on the phone, he would immediately say this: "Jeffrey, my man, how are you? How are you, son?" He had a way of listening and connecting that bonded us on the deepest of levels. His life lessons guided me at my lowest, and my achievements in business and in life are credited to the foundation that he gave me. Nampal relished in the role of being the patriarch, and his duty to the family was never shaken or taken off that path, even in the worst of times. In fact, it only became stronger. He was a true rock, a mensch. He defined the definition of loyalty and never once took for granted the Garden of Eden that he built. It's hard to imagine life without him, but I take comfort that there was no regrets. There was nothing that he left unsaid or undefined. With Nampal, you knew exactly where you stood, for he never kept anything in his mind, even when you hadn't a clue as to what he was talking about. I guess there's no quote to summarize his life, but the family, the friends, the community that he built, I can only look around this room as confirmation. That's his legacy, and let's honor that. I'm really going to miss you, Nampal. I hope I become half the man that you were. I love you.
Okay, Jeffrey and I want to thank you for sharing the viewpoint of what might call the second generation, but we'd be remiss if we didn't offer the first generation a chance. So, Mark and Greg, any preferences? Okay, so Mark first, then Greg.
Thanks, everybody, for being here today. Alvin Samuels didn't have a middle name, but there's no reason to give him one because there was only one Alvin Samuels. He was the youngest of 5 children, born to parents William and Fanny, who both immigrated to the United States as teenagers. His oldest sister, Bernice, was 16 years older, and his older brother, Bernard, was 15 years older. My son, Connor, can relate. His other sister was Selma, and his other brother was David. Those 5 had 16 children, and getting together with cousins, aunts, and uncles on both my dad's side of the family and my mom's side was always important to him. My dad always spoke of fond memories of sibling rivalry, mostly with his brother David, and growing up around a junkyard, working in his father's business, carrying hides, destroying car batteries, and using tire inner tubes as rubber band guns. He never complained about hard work, and during college was a roughneck, doing some of the most dangerous work a person can do. My mom's mom and my dad's mom were good friends in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. My parents went on a date, and 6 weeks later, they were married. That was 1960. Fanny and Edith were successful at what Hugo alluded to earlier, at meddling, fixing up a son with a friend's daughter home from college. My dad was strong, loving, generous, opinionated, and gave all the effort he could for his family and friends. My dad enjoyed tennis, and believe it or not, I enjoyed chasing down tennis balls when he and Hugo would play at City Park. He played handball and racquetball at the JCC and softball in the synagogue softball league. I also believe that he and my mom bowled in a league. My brothers and I got everything we needed from my parents, from healthy meals to solid educations, to a great sense of right and wrong, to love and strong feelings about our religion, which we each practice in a different way. We grew up in a loving home with dinner together around the table most nights at 6 o'clock. My dad was generous with his wealth, but at times, without our knowledge, had second mortgages to take care of responsibilities that even included his charitable giving. My dad was a drilling engineer with Shell Oil Company and was involved in some of the deepest drilling projects in the Gulf of Mexico. He eventually discovered a chemical that would remove hydrogen sulfide from oil and later from natural gas. He found a business partner who had access to the chemical and to much of the manufacturing capability and formed a 50-50 partnership in 1972. He traveled all over the world selling ironite. Later, they used the same chemistry in a product called Slurry Sweet to remove hydrogen sulfide from natural gas, and then a product called Sulfitreat, which removed hydrogen sulfide from natural gas in a solid form. The byproduct of this reaction was iron pyrite, or fool's gold. It was during those years that I was able to join my dad in the business. I had the privilege of working with my dad from 1989 until 1998, and continued to share office space after starting my record label until the levees broke in 2005. I got to see other sides of my dad than just dad. And although officially I was an employee who he hired and a co-owner of the company, he never treated me during those years as anything other than a business partner who appreciated what I brought to the table. We accomplished what he had set out to do, which was to build a company that was attractive to a larger company. And although we fought with our business partners for many years, we accomplished his goals. When the levees broke and the office we shared had water, and both of our homes had 4 or more feet of water, we all moved to Austin, where he quickly bought a home with my mom and invited me and my kids to live with them. The kids and I stayed for 1 school year, and my parents stayed there for about 5 years. They made it possible for me to go back and forth to New Orleans, giving stability to my kids and school while allowing me to maintain my relationship with Kara and rebuild my home and business. He and my mom have been there for us every day. In recent years, he's written 2 books, received a master's from Spertus College, or worked on a master's from Spertus College, and has become a firm believer in fusion energy and served on the board of advisors of Lawrenceville Plasma Physics, which you know now through what Hugo said, that they've made big inroads in fusion energy this year. And if you ever spent even just a couple minutes visiting with him, he would have been happy to tell you about it. Whether or not you agreed with my dad, the fact that he put his mind to use daily, working on goals to make the world better, is something to be admired. Others, like my brother Greg or my son Eric, were more capable of either listening to his ideas or debating his ideas than I was. But I appreciate that he believed so strongly in being a part of the process to bring world peace. Kara, Connor, Naomi, Eric, Ingrid, Marin, Jeffrey, Anna, and to be announced are grateful to have had their father, father-in-law, grandfather, and great-grandfather in their lives. It's amazing how many nieces and nephews are out there, and even how many call my dad their great uncle. There was not one day of my life that I ever doubted my father's love for me and my family, and I am forever thankful for that.
Thank you, Mark. And right.
I was blessed with an inspirational teacher, a brilliant, hardworking, motivational speaker who made me who I am. I admit in my youth, I wanted an emotionally supportive, responsive dad, and not a teacher, and definitely not an expert at everything. He was always the parent and I was always the kid. Dad was just too smart for that. His understanding of the world's problems became his personal quest. He felt that he had the tools to save the world. As a kid, I had the occasional nightmare that God would speak to him and he would sacrifice one of us. When I told him that, he assured me that he would have failed that challenge. Dad loved us so much. In an era when he felt that it was important that you love your mother and you fear or revere your father, but it was tempered by the fact that he had this unique ability to express his love through physical affection, both in public and in private. We shared thousands of hugs. I assure you, never enough. Fortunately, my sons Bram and Jacob, when you hug them, it feels just the same. Dad was so generous with us. He paid for my entire education. He lent me money several times as I was trying to build my practice. He never charged me interest. He always said, you can only pay it forward, never back. He said that the conversations we shared were the same exact conversations that our great-great-great-grandfather shared with his father or his son. We just know more now. Well, I'm not exactly sure that's true. I think it may have skipped a generation. It seems like maybe Bram is the only one who can really talk to Nampa about physics or engineering. Dad was blessed with an enormous IQ, but as is common, perhaps less of an EQ. I remember about 20 years ago, I was looking at a book. I was reading a book called How to Teach Children So the Children Will Listen. And Dad picked it up. I saw him out of the corner of my eye and he put it back down. I said, hey, you didn't care much for that one, huh? He looked at me incredulously and said, how did you know? I said, Dad, it was written all over your face. It really amazed me that for a man who could be that smart, he could also be so oblivious. I'm sure that every single person in this room and cousins and friends who are watching on the stream, he has angered you. He has upset you at some time or another. He's offended you. But He would say himself that he was non-judgmental, and he was. He was completely oblivious to the fact that he could wag his finger in your face, completely oblivious to his convictions, to his tone of voice, and his intimidating stature. You could reach your own conclusions, but he was going to tell you his. And he came by his convictions honestly. He grew up in a tiny town, Paragould, Arkansas. He was chubby as a kid, and he was bullied for being Jewish. So he got strong. He worked in the scrapyard, loading engine blocks and cowhides onto boxcars. Now, one thing I didn't know until just recently, actually about 10 years ago when he was writing his books, is that he studied both the Old Testament and the New Testament. That was commonplace in Paragould. And he knew both incredibly well. His parents knew that he couldn't make it into university if he went to the local high school. So they sent him away to military school, Western Military Academy, a place that has graduated titans of industry. My dad was the most decorated cadet to ever graduate from Western Military Academy. There was a student there, I should say, he played football, he was on the wrestling team, and he didn't take guff from anyone. When another student was bullied, my dad came to his defense, and parents of that student came up to my dad at graduation and told him that if not for my dad's assistance, their son would never have graduated. That was his stepping stone to the University of Illinois, the best engineering program in the country. He described that as the hardest 4 years of his life. He majored in chemistry, physics, and engineering. He also played football. But despite stellar grades, he couldn't get a summer internship until 1957, when the question of religious affiliation was statutorily mandated to be removed from job applications. That year, he got 22 offers. He learned that oil engineering was an up-and-coming industry, so he decided he would become familiar with it by working on an oil derrick. And they told him, no, we don't hire college students. He said he would work harder than anybody else worked. And he later admitted that was a mistake. It was the hardest physical labor he had ever done. But he was entering a field that was run by uneducated men with lots of field experience. And he quickly realized that if you want to tell people how to do things differently and more efficiently, you got to go in there and do the dirty work yourself. Mom was months away from graduating herself, second in her class at Washington University, when Dad proposed and said she'd have to quit school. And that's just what was done. Mom became mom, and we're grateful. Dad had reached a glass ceiling working for Shell Oil Company as a staff drilling engineer, where he constantly butted heads with academics who lacked field experience. And he realized that he knew more about his field than anybody else knew. So he set out to form his own drilling companies based on his own research and his patents. This work took him all over the world. Once to a place in China where they supposedly had never seen a white person before. Now, not just any white person, but a large, bald man in a full tracksuit, jogging down a country road, to the point where when he came back down to the place where he was living, the people had lined up along the side of the road to gawk, stare, and smile and wave at him. I suspect that the second white person they saw was probably a disappointment. When he was in Russia, Dad brought tallis and tefillin and blue jeans so that he could leave them there. He likes to imagine the number of people who were married under that tallis as a chuppah. He brought back treasures and art from every place he visited, often paying more than the asking price. He just couldn't acquire such exquisite pieces of art for the amount of money that was demanded. He had the strongest moral compass. He never spoke ill of anyone. I remember one time we were traveling in a mobile home to Disney World during Pesach, and we encountered a homeless man, which was very uncommon at the time in the 1970s. The man asked my dad for a couple of bucks. I remember so well, Dad went in and made a giant plate of leftovers, brisket and chicken and veggies and matzah, and put 2 20s on top of it. Dad lived an entire life of tzedakah, and after selling his companies, became a true philanthropist. He and I worked out together, and we enjoyed many intellectual conversations. He often challenged me, and like most of my clients, he thought that he knew more about the practice of law than I do. Actually, while it was a terrible time for Mark and for my dad, I remember that the 12 years of litigation that my dad was involved in is some of the best of my life. Dad and I would talk sometimes almost daily, and I would give him the best advice I could. Dad would say, he would thank me, and he'd say, "That's the same advice that my corporate lawyers in St. Louis are giving me." And I said, "Yes, Dad, I'm a lawyer now." Mom and Dad assured me that their parents continue to treat them like kids into their old age. Dad wrote us letters, which I still have, all written in his shorthand. They're fun to decipher. He wrote without vowels. While it's easy to complain about one's parents growing up, my friends had a different take. They thought they called my parents cool and hip and fun. Who are you talking about? My dad had a swagger, a confidence that was enviable. They always went to Jazz Fest. I mean, not just they went to Jazz Fest, they went to every day of Jazz Fest. Dad loved all of Mark's artists. Bill Summers, John Cleary, Dr. Michael White, Kermit Ruffins. He also loved my music. And we went together to concerts, Bare Naked Ladies. We went to Paul Simon. One thing that was really, truly cool is that on New Year's Eve, no matter where Mark and I were out partying and Will, my parents would leave their party after midnight and come to wherever we were to wish us a Happy New Year. When Dad sold his companies and officially retired, he never looked back, only forward. He pursued his master's degree in Jewish studies at Spertus. And while he had always read vociferously, he now had time to delve deeply into his beliefs and his Jewish practice. He grappled with anti-Semitism and with the Holocaust. Dad's message was very clear, that the blueprint known as the Bible was there for all of us as an answer to clean living. For him, his Judaism and his faith in God, as proven by the intelligent design of the universe, compelled him to further the message spoken by Moses and by Jesus. He said it must be interpreted without dogma, allowing each to understand it in his or her own way, that which enables each to achieve his or her potential without threat from another. And he put his money where his mouth is. My folks made significant gifts to Jewish day schools and Jewish camps, which their grandchildren attended, schools here in New Orleans, in Austin, and in Vancouver, to enable other students to receive a Jewish education. Dad was also a true Zionist and was honored by Israel Bonds for his work in lobbying the Louisiana State Legislature to purchase $5 million as a safe investment and encouraging other state treasurers to follow suit. Dad also gave an enormous gift to mankind by investing in fusion energy, convinced that that would be the secret to saving the world. I'd like to close with a message that my father wrote to his family. An ethical will. I hope to show you, my family, the importance of lifetime study as a means of being Jewish and as a means of leading to a clear understanding of why being Jewish is so important, not only to each of us individually, but for mankind. Everything there is to know is contained in the Torah, and we must continually turn it to discover the answers which are inherent in the Jewish soul and implanted in us at birth. These answers are not in heaven or across the seas, but within our grasp. From this study, we affirm being made in the image of God, descended from a common ancestor, and being our brother's keeper, with the responsibility to mend the world in our role as a nation of priests. We are chosen for service to God. Our religion must become not just a periodic practice, but a way of life that is with us always. It should influence our actions and every aspect of our relations with others, both professionally and at home. I would encourage each of you to study more with the objective of understanding the Bible as a code written for all time and capable of speaking truth to every age. This truth, however, must be seen through your own eyes and evaluated using your own life experiences. Do not let dogma enter or determine meaning, as easy or tempting as that may be, but rather write your own Torah throughout your own life. In so doing, you will come to see the face of God in family, friends, community, and mankind. The whole world and the universe will speak to you of God's greatness, and you will grow to love God completely. I pray that each of your lives will be as blessed as mine, and that I will leave you the crown of a good name. I love you very much. I love you too, Dad. I will miss you.
Thank you, Greg. And I want to thank all of our speakers, Mark and Greg, Jeffrey and Eric, you, Hugo, and in absentia, Rabbi Eric Citron. Just want to conclude with one brief observation. I came back to New Orleans after 30 years after last being here, and had the opportunity to meet Alvin. And the only word that comes to mind is everything about him was big. His stature, the tallest guy in the room, unless Greg was around and he was the second tallest guy in the room, that could be, right? A voice that could have carried several zip codes, really a booming voice. An insistence on not pondering, small ideas or small talk, right? Big ideas, big solutions, grand thoughts. Whatever he did on a grand scale, right? One without limits. Wherever the grandchildren wanted to go, they went. Whenever they needed to shop, I understand they got an unlimited credit card and not a limited credit card, right? When it came to giving, also, on a very large scale, philanthropy, and honored also, as mentioned by Israel bonds, right? It wasn't the sale of $25,000 or $50,000 worth of bonds, as not lovely as that would be. It was to the pension fund where you buy large scale blocks of bonds and encourage other state comptrollers to do likewise. Now, there's an interesting debate, and I thought of Alvin a lot when I was trying to say what do I want to say? There's a question, does God prefer a small, intimate setting or a large setting? To put it differently, if I had 100 Jews I could make 10 little minions, or I could make one giant one. And prayers would be the same. Well, no prayer quorum needs to be more than 10. Once you have 10, you can recite the entire service. You can recite the mourner's Chadash. You can read the Torah. You don't need more. And you would certainly have more groups going if you divide it that way. But then again, you know, there might be some advantages to having one large group. And this is just, as the Talmuds want, you know, it's just bounding back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But ultimately, the Talmud does come to a conclusion. It doesn't always do that, by the way, but in this case it does. It says, actually, if you're going to bring a group of people together, go big. The Almighty prefers one large group because that group sings God's praises the loudest. The Rov Am Hadrat Melech, the king's glory, that is God's glory, is found in the multitude. It's found in scale. It's found in grand ideas and grand abilities and grand solutions. And I want to thank Alvin for making that the centerpiece, apparently, of his entire life. And as you can see, the number of people who were touched by Alvin, that was pretty big too. That was big too. And I want to wish my condolences. I want to make sure I get all the names here to Greg and Mark and their spouses, Melanie and Kara. Also to the grandchildren. I'm going to read all the names here right off the sheet so I don't miss any. It's going to be tricky. Melanie and Melanie and Jennifer. The grandchildren are Jeffrey and Anna, Eric and Ingrid, Naomi, Bram, Jacob, Livia and Connor, great-granddaughter Marin, and to be determined later, yes. And I hope that the great legacy about which we said so much but could say so much more will be a source of comfort, especially to his most immediate family, to Mark and Greg, and of course to you, Madeline. And we hope that it will be something you will turn to over and over again as a source of comfort and of inspiration. And we say, Tehei Nishmato Baruch. His soul should be bound up in the bond of life eternal. I'm going to ask you in just a moment to rise for the memorial prayer of the Omolei Rachamim. Then I'll have a few announcements for those of us who will be continuing to determine and attending the Shiva. But I ask you to please rise if you're able to do so for just a moment. Our first recitation, memorial prayer, will be here in the sanctuary. El Omolei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamitzei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Shechina, B'malot Kedoshim Utorim, Kizohar Arakia Mazirim, Et Nishmat Chaim Ben Zev, Ufega Shalach La'olamo, Began Eden, Tehei Menucha Taho, Ana Bala Rachamim, Yasti Rehu Beseter Kenafecha Li'olamim, Utzeror, Bitzeror, Achaim et Nishmato, Adonai Unachalato, V'yanuch B'shalom Amishkavo, V'nomar Amen. Our God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace among the holy and pure to the soul of Alvin Samuels, of Chaim Ben Zev of Fega, who has gone to his eternal rest. Master of mercy, we beseech you to remember all of the worthy and righteous deeds which he performed while in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in peace, and let us say amen. So first of all, we're going to ask you to just remain where you are, because we're going to have the pallbearers remove the casket first, and the family will follow. For those of you who are continuing to the site of the interment, this will take place at the Heber Tillim Memorial Park. That's 5000 Iberville. We ask you to follow the directions which will be given so that we can proceed as a group. Shiva this evening and tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., and that will be at the Samuels home. That's 200 Metairie Road. It's apartment B. You'll see you have to go through the back to go up. You'll see when you get there. I want to ask you just to remain standing and then follow out after the cast has been removed. And I want to thank everybody for their presence here at the sanctuary service, and also those who may have joined us live stream. We thank you for your participation this morning in our service.
Rabbi, let me say that we've ordered police, but I guess it's because it's a holiday. They have not shown up. So I would urge you all to be very careful, but we will be going at West Esplanade to Causeway, 610 to Canal Boulevard. So if you have on your emergency flashers, at least they will know you're in a procession. We hope.